Thank you, Arjun. I think there was a net interrupt and a little cyber interrupt. And I was at that time talking about that air will dictate rapidity of response, and after cyber will be the first responder to any crisis. And I think that this is the part where I got disconnected, and it I couldn't help but think that the coincidence that I was going to talk about cyber being the only factor in any any air power employment that can be faster than the air. Okay, so as a critical tool of national policy, APAR plays a key role in not only ensuring regional stability but also enhancing mutual cooperation. While we aim to work towards the mutual good of the region, it is important to highlight the overarching capabilities that IF brings to the table today. In case of any punitive action, IF is at the very forefront of offensive capability with its reach, speed, precision. That is the ground reality today. With the induction of air-to-air refuelers, IF has rapidly evolved towards a capability and seamlessly integrated this capability into our operational matrix, where our reach has increased tremendously. Our expertise in undertaking complex long-range op missions, both by day and night, across diverse platforms, is more or less unmatched in this region, in our region. The recent non-stop ferries from France to India by Rafales within probably 15 days of our pilots getting operational on those aircraft is just an example of what our operational thinking is and how we employ it, and underscores this unique capability, which is further bolstered by our ability to look deep inside enemy territory using our long-range surveillance platforms. As we rapidly integrate new long-range standoff weapons with pinpoint accuracy, IF can easily undertake precise targeting missions at long distances, 3,000 kilometers, 4,000 kilometers. It's just a matter of how we plan our refueling. So our offensive capability is also complemented by our formidable strategic airlift capability, which can deliver virtually about 800 tons of load in a single wave to any location in the Indo-Pacific. To just give you an example, when we were doing the COVID tasks within the country and some abroad, for the COVID airlift aspects, IF undertook non-stop missions at short notice to rescue many Indians from as far as Congo. And overall, our effort was till date, if you talk about the air miles clocked towards this effort alone, was 350,000 kilometers, almost approximate to the distance to the moon. And this is with the restricted COVID protocols. So the capability that we have today for this kind of task is huge. The knowledge that we are able to kinetically deliver a weapon or a relief pallet swiftly and surely is a source of concern to our adversaries and one of comfort to our friends. We will continue to maintain our capabilities and training to remain able to deliver precise and calibrated effect throughout our area of responsibility and touch anywhere in our extended neighborhood to deliver assistance to our friends. This ability to instantly deliver either a swift blow or an instant assistant is what will temper adversaries' ambition on one hand and build trust with our friends on the other. And I think that is important capability that we bring to the table. A strong aerospace manufacturing base is also essential for India to achieve self-reliance as well as support needs of a rapidly expanding aviation sector within the country, which will also support the neighborhood. IF has launched a major indigenization drive for sustenance of all our fleets, that means on the maintenance aspects. This, coupled with our perspective plans for procurement of indigenous fighter aircraft, weapons, and sensors, forms the most comprehensive indigenization roadmap laid out in the country thus far. And it is my belief that this will prove to be the growth engine for India's domestic aerospace manufacturing capability. Air power employment in a complex multidimensional environment is highly technology sensitive. IF would have to be at the forefront of collaborative partnership in high-end technology. Under Make in India project, these collaborations can not only help India in leapfrogging to niche technologies, but also serve as the growth engines for regional economic revival and growth. The IOR is one of the most densely populated areas in the world and is prone to natural calamities, with some of the most catastrophic natural disasters to life and property have been witnessed by the people in this region in the past. India's unique disposition in the IOR provides the ideal geostrategic location to be able to contribute significantly to the security of IOR and the Indo-Pacific. Here again, AIRPAR has been especially useful for prompt emergency response in providing HADR. In terms of disaster relief during operations, our civil assets will also be a crucial addition to our AIRPAR capability. The large inventory of civil aircraft is available for undertaking humanitarian missions as well as strategic deployment of our troops. Just to give you a broad overview on the magnitude of HADR operations undertaken by the IF, in the last 5 years alone, we have tackled roughly about 100 contingencies, during which we have flown 6,000 plus sorties and evacuated more than 44,000 civilians in distress. This just last 5 years. To deepen the HADR cooperation and coordination among our neighbors, we have also been conducting regular exercises with an aim to share our expertise and assist in capability building. So to conclude, AIRPAR remains vital for not only ensuring victory in any conflict, but also is most crucial for providing a degree of assurance in strengthening regional peace and security initiatives. A modern Air Force operating in synergy with Army and Navy will ensure that India fulfills its role as a net security provider. IF is well poised for significant effort to serve national interests and provide key capabilities for extending stabilizing hand in the region. I wish NDC the very best for a successful webinar, and Jai Hind, wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Air Chief Marshal Bhaduria, for laying out the strategic landscape and laying out the future as far as Indian air power is concerned, what it has, what needs to be done, and what the future holds. A quick recap before a couple of important points that I want to reiterate. In any short and swift conflict of the future, inflicting combat attrition on an adversary's forces in the quickest possible time holds the key to speedy conflict termination and subsequent achievement of political outcomes of any conflict. Attrition can be inflicted quickest and most effectively by AIRPAR, not only in shaping the battlefield, but also in hitting targets deep inside, beyond the tactical battle area. So offensive air power will remain extremely important in any short and intense conflict. The Air Chief talked about flexibility, freedom of maneuver, targeting with minimum collateral damage, and the application of air power in conjunction with special forces. These are all extremely important pointers to take forward by the bulk of you who are operational practitioners and who will go back and look at how to amalgamate air power into your concept of operations. He talked about the spread of operational thinking, long-range maritime, cautious about the kind of challenges that face us, stare us in the face in the years ahead, which are very, very many. Now, the speed of change in the face of internal security threats that are very, very visible by the newly emerging threats that you so clearly outlined means that large states like India are always playing catch up with more nimbler or with nimbler adversaries. And that brings to mind immediately the need of the state to operate inside the OODA loop of these nimbler adversaries. And that is going to be one big challenge in the
comes externally, but the cohesion of all information available within the country. And to that effect, the Navy has taken up very strongly for the National Maritime Domain Awareness Program, in which we intend to link all stakeholders, including the intelligence community, into this particular construct. and connect them, have analysts, so that we can make sense out of everything that is happening in the maritime domain. So this is a very much a focus area for the Indian Navy and the Indian government.
Ensure that we go in for a settlement on the boundary issues, and therefore I think the nation has been continuously engaging both our adversaries, China and Pakistan, to settle our boundaries, the LAC in Ladakh and the other areas. So it is for us to mutually decide and come to a conclusion. Now, unless both sides come to a conclusive agreement, there cannot be a final understanding or alignment of the line of actual control. But I think some progress has been made, and continuously the China Study Group attempts to work towards reconciliation of the boundary with China. Whether this situation will finally lead to a situation of demarcation of the line of actual control is difficult to say, because things are happening at the tactical level, at the strategic level. How the two nations look at the boundary issue is something very different on a different plane. So I would not like to really say that this will lead to the demarcation and alignment of the line of actual control. But yes, certainly we hope that situations of this kind as has happened now should set the ball rolling for an ultimate settlement of the boundary, should both sides come to a conclusive agreement. And therefore the effort is on to resolve the boundary issue.
The anonymous person who's asked this question, while the operations which have been undertaken in eastern Ladakh have been tactical in nature, but it is an inflection point in the history as to how we have been dealing with China, especially when we are both signatories to various agreements on maintaining peace and tranquility along the borders. So therefore, the tactical operations have had strategic outcome in this particular case, and from there on, the course of the boundary resolution talks, I'm sure, will also change, and in the years to come, we may have more progress achieved as far as the boundary issue is concerned. But certainly, tactical operation group of ministers in their report post the Kargil war, we have been able to implement it across various benign borders and where the borders are settled, where there are no conventional threats which are likely to manifest from across the border. However, where the borders are active, in those segments of our national boundaries, we have not been able to implement this particular principle which the group of ministers report mentioned. But this phrase also cannot be taken just at the face value. We have to see what the connectivity is across various segments of our borders, and therefore there are areas which are segmented geographically, and may not be able to look after those areas. But nonetheless, it's a principle which we must achieve. However, in active borders, the primacy has to be the unified command and control, which the Home Secretary also referred to as Army, which is the land component of the joint force, which in future will address any contingency which we can.
The nations, and the basic purpose is to ensure that we have freedom of operation along the high seas in the Indo-Pacific. There are a large number of nations which want to become a part of this Quad, and I think it will have to be a collective process with all the members agreeing to take on membership of additional nations. And I think the stronger we make Quad, the better it is for ensuring freedom of navigation. And that's all I would like to say, that yes, we would like additional membership, but that should happen through a collective mechanism. And let me also tell you, it's not an alliance moving forward. And Quad becoming Quad Plus or a Quad Plus Plus, only time will tell, but it will have to be through a collective mechanism where all the 4 member nations should agree to taking on additional members. It is higher priority because of the fact that it is the insurgency there and the terrorism there is being fueled from a neighboring country, which is actually indulging in proxy war with us. But if you notice, the focus is not just J&K, focus has shifted. We have shifted focus to our other borders and to the global arena. I mean, we are also looking at now the development of our resources in the maritime domain. We are looking at how to develop resources in the aerospace sector. So I think the focus is not just on J&K. J&K happens to be one of our internal security problems which we have to deal with. We had similar problems in the Northeast. We've been able to resolve that. And so now focus has shifted this side. We had a similar problem in Punjab. We were able to resolve that. So gradually, I think we have been able to resolve J&K to a great extent. And if you notice last year with the abrogation of 370 and 35 alpha, there has been a visible change and improvement that is being witnessed in that state. So gradually the focus is shifting there to the other borders and into the global arena. So I wouldn't really say that we are fixated to J&K. Yes, we were fixated there for a large amount of time in the 90s and maybe some part of our early 2000 as we came into the new century. But that was necessitated at that time, but gradually the focus is moving out. Just on the Northeast, the people in these states have realized the futility of insurgency and fueling insurgency and carrying out any kind of trouble. And as the Home Secretary brought out, that is why you find a lot of these insurgent groups, their leaderships are coming on board. Our neighboring countries, especially Myanmar and Bangladesh, have been very supportive to us in ensuring that their soil is not used for support to insurgents across the borders. So I think with that complete collaborative approach where the government themselves have started focusing on the development of the Northeast, and we are looking at the Act East policy where the eastern states gain priority and the donor is looking at development of the northeastern states. So people are realizing the futility of insurgency, and I don't think any amount of effort by anybody to restart the insurgency there will find favor with the local population.
An open discussion and views on India's internal security situation and other security challenges. I'm quite certain that the participants and viewers could not have asked for a more elaborate and detailed analysis of what lies ahead when it comes to national.
Hello,
Sir.
am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Yes, sir.
Oh, thank
welcome
you
you for giving out the closing remarks for this virtual webinar organized by the National Defense College. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much, Rohitji. Air Marshal Chaudhary, Commandant of NDC, faculty and course members, distinguished participants, and guests. It's an honor and privilege to give the closing remarks for the Diamond Jubilee webinar being hosted by NDC. Thank you for inviting me and for this seminar. Over the last 2 days, the event has drawn a very impressive list of participants and speakers, and they have covered a wide canvas of topics and issues having direct bearing on our national security. I must confess that any crystal gazing in these difficult times for anyone is a perilous proposition. But having said this, I must also admit that the topic for the webinar was very relevant to our times when India is facing inescapable trade-offs and stark choices in the rapidly changing geopolitical scenario and dealing with changes in the capabilities and intent of our immediate adversaries. We also have to parallelly look at measures to spur our economic growth, to bring equitable development, and to restore the fast momentum of growth of economy which we had in the pre-pandemic times. Therefore, given these circumstances, I would like to congratulate NDC for having looked at these various myriad of challenges through the prism of this webinar in a very comprehensive, systematic, and logical way. Friends, presently in the backdrop of COVID-19, the world order is witnessing increasing turbulence and power contestations. The very foundation of globalization, which emerged post-Cold War era, has been severely jolted, with nationalism coming to the fore. Powerful economic, demographic, and technological forces are shaping a new balance of power. The result is an unsettled flux, which is creating a geopolitical landscape in which states are today viewing opportunities and challenges which are quite different from that in the past. The construct of national security for every nation state, which includes the political, economic, and military components of power, has more potent emerging challenges in terms of this new demographics, environment, technology, etc. Friends, we are in midst of transformative demographic change across the globe. The global working age is increasing because of slower population growth rate. But this aging is not equally distributed, creating risks to political stability in countries with either very old or very young populations. And shifting of the geopolitical balance of power in favor of economies with sustainable working age populations is having its own dynamics. Climate change is yet striking harder and more rapidly than expected. The last 5 years have seen one of the warmest periods on record. Natural disasters are becoming more intense and frequent. The technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, while on one side promise long-term gains in efficiency and productivity, but they have disrupted the geopolitical balance of power and have huge social consequences. Technology is also catalyzing geopolitical competition in this era of emerging regionalism. More than 50% of the world's population is now online, and 2/3 of the global population own a mobile phone. While digital technology is bringing tremendous economic and societal benefits to much of the global population, we also need to address issues of unequal access and increased disparity because of unequal access, need for greater global technology governance framework, which will increasingly affect strategic influence of the future, cyber security, and the new dimensions of information war, all of which pose significant new kind of challenges and risks. Geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainty, including the possibility of fragmented cyberspace, also threatens to prevent this full potential of next generation technologies from being realized. Amidst all these global challenges of the 21st century, the concentration of economic power has shifted from the West to the East. And this has also resulted in global balance of power shifting to the Indo-Pacific region. The region has now become the new strategic center of gravity in the international politics. However, despite this shift, Indo-Pacific region remains a turbulent region beset by internal conflicts and political transitions, and subject to continuing instability due to the contested external environment and increasing militarization. Many old territorial and boundary disputes have resurfaced in recent times, and they have potential to create sudden conflagration. Friends, in this evolving complex world order, India is at a decisive point in its journey towards development and growth. The economic crisis sparked by COVID-19 has also provided us with huge opportunities to spur reforms and to take up those measures which have been pending for a long time and which can enable the country to return to the high growth track. India's achievement of economic growth targets, as well as reaping a demographic dividend by providing quality education and generating jobs for its youthful force within the next decade, is critical to empowering the Indian nation and its people in a time-bound manner. At the time of global economic instability, because of the ongoing pandemic, India would need to insulate itself from market fluctuations by focusing on domestic market through reforms in the domestic policies and meeting targets in job creation. Towards this end, a lot has been done and many steps are in process of being taken. What then are the implications for Indian security in the decades ahead? It is in this backdrop that we need to look afresh at our national security and chart a pragmatic course to allow the pursuit of India's national interests of a more serious, prosperous, and fulfilling life for all its citizens. The security horizon for India in the coming decades will have to contend with a host of new actors and myriad challenges. The multidimensionality of the security challenges implies that India has to employ all the available instruments of statecraft, including its hard power for promotion of national interests. Technology has further enlarged the spectrum of utilization of this hard power, with changes in the methodology of waging wars and with mediums of space, cyber, social media gaining prominence. In this area, we need to work on our strengths to build greater capability. Friends, like I mentioned yesterday, indigenous technology development to achieve self-reliance for our defense needs is the only way forward for necessary impetus towards having true self-reliance. Prime Minister's call to the nation to build an Atmanirbhar Bharat has resonated well with the industry and the people of India. A number of measures have been taken to enhance the capital allocation, the allocation for capital procurement, to ensure continuous capability building of the armed forces, whether it is in the continental, maritime, cyber, or space domains. Simultaneously, there is also a drive to strengthen and prioritize internal security policies, structures, and training. Friends, While India's security forces strive to provide stable internal and external environment, India would have to empower itself concurrently by making tangible gains in several non-traditional fields of security. These would include areas like energy security, with focus on renewable sources. India needs to give due importance to water security in terms of adequacy of water for households, agriculture, and industrial purposes. Human security, which will take center stage to focus on poverty alleviation, food and nutritional security, health and habitat security. Another important area is the ecological and environmental security, to include mitigation from the effects of climate change and environmental degradation, as well as overexploitation and pollution of natural resources. In addition, educational empowerment, skill development, scientific and technological empowerment would require sustained focus. And as you all know, steps in each of these sectors have been initiated by the government, whether it is in terms of reaching the 20 gigawatt solar power target for renewable energy, whether it is safe drinking water for every single household in the country, or providing electricity in every single household, economic development and housing for all, creating more environment-friendly development, measures like carbon neutral Ladakh are all unique initiatives by which India is trying to fulfill the security requirements in these non-traditional fields. Technology is driving the world, and therefore there is competition for control. Competition to control technology, competition to control data, competition to control information, and competition to control natural resources. We in India, therefore, need to become increasingly self-reliant in technology. We need to become increasingly strong in terms of being able to ensure that our resources are not underutilized. We must further make a resolve to make Atmanirbhar Bharat, which will ensure that our country becomes not insulated but an important member of the global value chain. The Indian Ocean and our Sagar strategy, security and growth for all in the region, is aimed to ensuring cooperative and collaborative security and peace in the region. While we keep our borders safe, seas open, we must also ensure that the skies and space are also defended and kept free in the interests of national security. Hence, it is clear that in spite of India making substantial progress towards economic and human development in the last 7 decades, more needs to be done. More needs to be done in a time-bound, focused manner, so that the desired aspirations of the people, the prosperity of every citizen, as well as the rightful place to India and its citizens in the global order is achieved. It is in this backdrop of the current geopolitical scenario that we think that growth of India in a faster, much faster manner in the coming decades, utilizing our technological capabilities, reforming our governance structures and systems, will pave the way forward. We would like to say that our growth does not threaten anyone, and we do not get threatened by anyone. Let me conclude that the decade ahead holds a lot of promise and belongs to India. It belongs to India, with India having the opportunity to become a prosperous nation and a strategically important balancer as a global player. Friends, let me conclude. Let me conclude by congratulating NDC, specifically the Commandant NDC and his entire team, for having brought together absolutely superb set of speakers and a wide set of participation of audience from India as well as from abroad. This international webinar has been conducted in an absolutely professional manner, which befits this historical moment of Diamond Jubilee celebration by NDC. Let me wish NDC, its alumni, its current participants, its faculty, and all those associated with this webinar all the success in the future. And once again, my best wishes to the graduating members of the 60th course, whom I look forward to meet on 11th of this month. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Kumar. You've really well rounded off what the whole discussion, giving us a 360 view of India's national security the decade ahead. Now, may I invite Commandant Air Marshal Diptendu Chaudhary, Commandant, National Defence College, for the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We've had 2 excellent and even-filled days spent in long debate and discussions as a part of NDC's Diamond Jubilee webinar. The 2 days saw eminent speakers speaking and sharing thoughts on the contours of India's security in the decade ahead. On behalf of the National Defence College, I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks to all those who have directly or indirectly contributed to the organization and conduct of this event. I wish to convey our deepest gratitude to the Honorable Raksha Mantri Shri Rajnath Singh Ji for his inaugurating the webinar with his insightful keynote address on national security. We are immensely thankful to Dr. Ajay Kumar, Union Defence Secretary, who summed up the seminar today wonderfully and who has encouraged and supported the National Defence College in all our endeavors. I would also like to thank General Rawat, the Chief of Defence Staff, Admiral Karambir Singh, the Chief of Naval Staff, Air Chief Marshal R.K.S. Bhaduria, the Chief of Air Staff, Lieutenant General V.K. Saini, the Vice Chief of Army Staff, Mr. Ajay Kumar Bhalla, the Union Home Secretary, Dr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey, the Union Revenue Secretary, Shri Harshvardhan Shringla, Union Foreign Secretary, all of them for sparing the valuable time from their busy schedules and participating in this webinar and making it so meaningful. Their talks enriched and enhanced the quality of debate and have generated excellent takeaways from the webinar theme of India's national security, the decade ahead. I also wish to convey our deepest gratitude to all other esteemed speakers and chairpersons who spared their valuable time and contributed immensely towards making the webinar a success. I would like to make a special mention of Major General Arvind Walia, the Senior Directing Staff at NDC, and his core team of course members and all the faculty and staff of NDC, particularly the IT staff, who have put in long hours of work to make this event happen and without, may I add, affecting the conduct of the course in any way. And finally, I would be failing if I do not thank Mr. Rohit Gandhi and his entire team who provided their wholehearted technical support for the event. Without them, a seminar with such a large participation would not have been possible. Thank you, everybody, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Air Marshal D. Chaudhary. It has been a phenomenal 2 days, and the deliberations that have taken place have really, shown the kind of wide array of ideas that India is taking forward. Thank you very much for joining us for this virtual Diamond Jubilee webinar. Goodbye.